and people will straggle in because that's the way these things always work.
Ah,
Tattoo artists always squeezing one more tattoo in before they show up. Queens. Oh yeah.
Queens. Oh,
So
Queens.
most people have met me in this room, but for the sake of everyone's knowledge base, this meeting is going to be recorded and we are going to put it back onto YouTube. So whatever you didn't pick up tonight, we're going to have it on YouTube so that you can just still go back and rewatch it and share it with your friends. My name's Matt, and I started a program called Jackpot Tattoo Community. Ringo's a member, everyone, Dave's a member, Ryan's got a membership. And that's a group it's a paid group, but I realize there's more people out there that we can reach. And so this is our second Mind Your Business. Mind Your Business comes from a coin that Benjamin Franklin designed. And the first penny, it says mind your business with a double entendre of minding your business and minding your business. So I thought that was cute and clever. So I used it for these monthly meetups. I've been tattooing for, I don't know, almost 30 years now. And this is my way of giving back. I'll be done tattooing within 5 or 6 years as far as a full-time artist goes. And before I exit stage left, I'm trying to create as many programs as possible to give back to the community that's given so much to me. The reason I love the education part so much is when I first started tattooing in the 90s, there was no internet. There was no connecting. You had to go to a convention and or you had to see someone in person. And that's the route I took. I started tattooing in St. Louis, and that took me, across the world to Japan and Europe and Brazil and most of the states. And I got to work one-on-one with a whole lot of great people. And I learned a lot. And so I just like that idea of the community of us sharing and us learning together. As the idea goes, all ships rise. So um, when we're gonna start our meeting up tonight, we got a few more people coming in because we don't even have all of our speakers in the room yet. What we're gonna do is we're going to have Dave speak for 40 minutes or so. And then we're gonna have I think we got Ryan second, and then we got Lars last. And so Ryan's going to talk about some of the light fast and talk about why tattoos can fade over time and whatnot. And then Dave just wrote a book that should be coming out soon. He'll talk more about that. The release date's just a couple weeks away. So Dave's on his book tour, his internet book tour that now they do it nowadays. And then his book is called Horimono, a Western Perspective. And then Lars is going to be on. He's going to talk about more of the tattoo history, and that's I think is more important. Or what I think is important is combining the old with the new as we do this. So each one of these meetups is going to have a little bit of old and a little bit of new in it, so that we can balance out what tattooing is and really find the heart and soul of tattooing. Anybody can buy equipment and start working. But you'll learn right away that what we do has a huge impact on people's lives, and we truly do stand on the shoulders of giants. And so we're going to touch on all of that today as people slowly keep coming in. With that, I'm going to go ahead and do my introduction for Dave. I've known Dave for over a decade. I don't know if it's been 15 years by now. Um, we've had a lot of great late night conversations, a lot of long phone calls, and we both share a lot of the passions when it comes to tattooing that goes to a deeper level that you just don't understand until you've put a little bit of time in. There's this weird thing that happens with learning any craft is when you remain a student of the craft, you don't create more answers, you actually create more questions. And Dave has been pursuing a lot of questions over the last 20 some years, which has led him to, as he says it, kind of accidentally wrote a book one day. And that long journey and process of doing that. Dave's tattooing out of Denver, and his primarily does these huge, awesome Japanese tattoos, which takes a lot of courage and trust and a lot of commitment from both parties, not just the tattoo artist, but also the collector has to be as knowledgeable about the commitment that's going to be put into it too. So it's a totally different level of tattooing once you start getting into bodysuits, and that's kind of what we're going to touch on today. I'm going to give it away to Dave, and if there's any of the bio that I miss, he's going to fill in the gaps for us. I will mute my mic, and if there's anything that you need, Dave, I'll jump right on in. I'm going to turn it to speaker mode as soon as I figure out where that button's at. But besides that, Dave, thank you for coming onto this meeting, and the floor is yours, my friend.
Well, right on. Well, thank you for having me. I'm going to go ahead and just start this out by saying that anybody that has questions about anything at any point during this, please, feel free to just holler. It's totally no problem. We do have people, looks like, trying to get into the room. They keep popping up. So I'm going to let folks in as I see them as well. But yeah, just to give you a quick background on me. I am coming into my 24th year tattooing. I started back in Baltimore, Maryland. Been at it for a little while now. When I first got going, I was pretty much one of those guys who was 7 days a week, working between as many different shops as I could, which at that time was pretty unconventional. And then in my process, I was there about 9 years and then came out here to work at Boulder Inc. in Boulder, Colorado. Worked there for a while and then started to really lean in harder to traveling. Did a big motorcycle tour across the States, which in turn inspired me to go overseas. Spent a lot of time living over in Europe and kind of using that as a home base. Spent a few years working between Iceland and Africa, a ton of other points, and then came back to Denver prior to taking a job offer in Thailand, which ended up not panning out because the offer I got in Denver was so good. So I've been here since. I opened my own studio about a year and a half ago or so. It's all private, one-on-one kind of stuff, largely because most of the work I do is bodysuits or work that requires a certain degree, or not requires, I should say, but work that's benefited by having a certain degree of privacy and a certain degree of anonymity as well. COVID was kind of a funky time for us, with everybody kind of being out of work for a while. I mean, personally, I'm not trying to humble brag about it. I had a great time. I got a lot of stuff done. But one of the things that 2-month break from work allowed me to do was kind of reanalyze what it was that I wanted out of my career. I had hit about 20 years in, and I've enjoyed tattooing thoroughly, which is not to say that I've had a good time doing it the entire time, but I've really enjoyed it. And I wanted to spend the remaining years of my career doing the thing that I'm the most passionate about, which has been traditionally inspired Japanese work. And that's really important to me, that whatever the remaining time I have is utilized making myself happy as much as it is making the client happy. And so what I found when I kind of started making this transition over to a focus on Japanese or traditionally inspired work, was that I was answering a lot of the same questions in my consults. And I mean, I would say people almost treated it like Mexican food. It's like, well, I got a dragon and I got a koi and I got these elements and I just want to arrange them in a certain way on my arm or on my leg or this or that. And, instead of spending my time explaining to person by person, hey, this is my process, this is what I do, this is how I think about this, I started writing, I guess, kind of like a guidebook for how I choose to approach large scale tattooing. And it is as I see it, of course. And I put this up on my website. And what I found was people were reading it. The requests I was getting for work seemed to be a little bit more streamlined. And this touched on a lot of basics. It touched on Japanese history. It touched on cultural influences. It touched on my process and a few other odds and ends. But people seemed to utilize it, but continued to ask questions. And so as the questions kept coming, I noticed that they weren't just from tattooers. A lot of these questions were actually more from my clients or more from people that had very little idea what any of this was about. And it kind of just kept planting these seeds that insisted, eventually that you write something. Because I think for any of us, if you feel like you have a voice that you're able to utilize in a way that benefits a lot of people and you choose not to do it, I think you're doing yourself a disservice, and I think you're doing the community a disservice. Saying that, it is not to try and present myself as an authority, because that's not at all what I'm interested in being. But in writing this book, what I wanted to do was try and help people just have a clearer vision of what this work is. And as Westerners, you know, we are culturally disadvantaged. I mean, there is not a whole lot that we can do in our day-to-day that echoes life in Japan in particular. But I think it's a lot more than just, oh, I see these pictures, or, oh, I'm interested in, you know, ukiyo-e prints, or I think tattoos look cool, or I think it's this, or I think it's that, or it's, you know, I want to make wind swirls, I want to do background tattoos. Whatever your reason, like there's an overarching feel to this work that I think is really lost in a lot of Western influenced work. And so that is effectively the point of the book, is to try and just present people a broad overview, I guess, of a lot of these concepts. And so I'm going to kind of give you guys I guess, a quick run through of the book itself and kind of the points that we touch on. Are there any questions about anything before we get into any of that?
Can we see the book?
Sure, absolutely. So sorry for my camera, but this is the slipcase. Done a really nice job. The book is published by Afterlife Publishing. We should be looking for a release on the second week of August or so, but this is what we're looking at. Again, apologies for my camera. And it's extremely well made. We really have lucked out. The print quality and stuff. Biggest difference with this book, as you'll notice, is there are only a small number of pictures. Everything else is text. So the whole point of this was really to offer people a resource to study, not just a regurgitation of the same photos that we've all seen, or the same, you know, handful of points that I think we've discussed. Now, that said, there is another book out right now called Waboripedia, and I have to tell you, I think it is a perfect companion book to go with what I have. We do touch on some of the same points, but by and large, his focus is more on the themes that we find more in Japanese tattooing. My book is more on, I would say, the philosophy of kind of what lies behind all of that stuff. As I said, I don't find myself much of an authority on anything, and so I had this book peer reviewed by a number of different people, including a number of different harishi from different families, and I would say by and large was helped the most by Tatsutoshi of the Horitoshi Ichimon. He gave me probably the most invaluable feedback of anyone, aside from the editor, who coincidentally is my brother, but he's an archaeologist and an anthropologist. This is part of his job full-time for years. And I think the best part is that he doesn't tattoo. And so his questions became really evocative. And I think that really benefited the overall quality of the book, as well as Tatsutoshi. I mean, he would bring things up, be like, oh, you talk about this, but you don't touch on that. Another thing, especially being culturally disadvantaged, being a Western person, my Japanese is not great. I can read a bit, I can speak a bit, but I'm far from fluent. And there are a lot of nuances that are incredibly easy to lose in translation. But I think trying to capture a feeling isn't something that really gets lost in translation, provided that you're thinking about it the right way. And so I think if we're going to do this work as Westerners in a way that feels genuine, to whatever degree it does, a lot of that is about kind of the amount of study that we're willing to do, the amount of work that we're going to put in on our after hours, the nights that we'll spend at home drawing the same back piece for the 40th time. But I think, to me, in the writing of this, what I've come to conclude is that Horimono it's more a philosophy than it is anything else. And again, that's what I hope to kind of talk about with the book. Let me pull my notes up here. But getting into the book, the first things I touch on are the history of this. Tattooing has been prevalent in Japan for a really, really, really long time by many Japanese people. And when we say Japanese people, we do need to remember that there's not one group of people that is ethnographically Japanese. I mean, Japan is a merging of 5 or so different major cultures with history that dates back as far as 60 or 70,000 years. Evidence of tattooing appeared as early, at least based on what I found, as early as the Jomon period. And the Jomon period was prehistoric, but it was classified by pottery wares that had rope patterns that had been impressed into them. And some of you may be aware of figures known as dogu. Dogu are very short, squat figures that sort of have, they almost look African, is the best way I could describe it. But very short, very squat, almond-shaped eyes. But a lot of them have swirls and patterning on them that a lot of folks believe is a direct correlation to early forms of tattooing. There was a group of Chinese scholars that were sent on an official trip, I guess, to study Japan in the early 200s, and they wrote that essentially every man, woman, and child was tattooed, and they kind of alluded to it being a bit of a barbaric practice. And the Chinese were also where punitive tattooing came from. And this is something that had been practiced in China for much longer than it ever was in Japan. But the first records of tattooing in Japan that we really see, or at least the first records of punitive tattooing, excuse me, were in the early 400s. There was a gentleman that tried to plot an assassination for the emperor at that time, and instead of having him executed, he had an eyeball tattooed on his head that every single person that saw him knew he was an outcast, knew he was pushed out of society. So that's where we sort of start to see one of the earlier connotations of tattooing as, you know, sort of the gritty underbelly of Japan. But as time went on, tattoos still existed. They didn't exist in the way that we think of them. Horimono, I would argue, didn't really come into fashion until the late 1700s, and it really exploded in popularity once the Soikoden by Utagawa Kuniyoshi was released, which I believe was 1827. Don't have this in my notes, of course. People were getting tattooed heavily before that. Originally, what we would call a full suit now, we would call Donbori Soshinbori. But at that time, a full suit would have been called Gaenbori. Now, Gaen was the original name for firefighters. So it kind of gives you a sense of, okay, the firefighters were the people that kind of proliferated seeing large scale tattooing, but it certainly wasn't limited to them. It's just, you know, if you have an association that's that strong, you know, that the style is the firefighter style tattoo, that tells you an awful lot about who really influenced that. Now, funny enough, Gaen also means rascal. So it kind of lends you to the understanding that the firefighters were about as dangerous as they were helpful. And a lot of them at that time wore jackets that were called Hikeshi Banten. And Hikeshi Banten is a really unique multi-layered woven fabric. If you've ever been to Japan, there's a wonderful firefighters museum in Asakusa where you can actually see these jackets in person. From the outside, they don't appear to be much of anything special. They look like a traditional Hikeshi jacket, or excuse me, Hanten jacket. But firefighters would soak these garments and then wear them as they went in. That would offer them some kind of protection from the fire that was in front of them. And when the job was done, they would then come back from the fire and they would take the jackets off and flip them inside out to reveal the designs that were painted on the inside. And I mean, there are thousands of different kinds of designs painted on the inside of these coats. And so it's not that hard to see, okay, there's a direct correlation between the images on these coats and then the images that these guys would eventually choose to wear. A full suit would certainly be indicative of your willingness to endure the pain of getting tattooed. And at that time, as colors were extraordinarily limited, there was only sumi, and then there was shu, which is a type of sumi that's derived from cinnabar, which is mercury sulfide. So you get that really beautiful, bright color, but every time you had it done, you get wildly ill. So it could only be done in small sections. And the idea was, you know, the more red you had in your tattoo, the more tough you were. But it wasn't exclusive to the firefighters. I mean, this became something that was open to basically all lower non-aristocratic classes. So, you know, gamblers would wear these, fishermen would wear these, tradesmen would wear these, merchants would wear these. And it's really hard to say, oh, these guys were the ones that really carried it, or these guys were really the ones that carried it, because there is so much kind of cross-pollination there. But the way I've read it is it would have been more unusual to be in Edo in Japan in the 1830s to the 1870s and see anyone in those classes who wasn't heavily tattooed. Some of the other factors that led to the tattooing at that level were there was a really, really, really rigid military government that was put into place at the beginning of Edo, which I believe was 1608. I don't have this written in front of me, so I apologize. My dates aren't totally right. But Edo basically was marked by Ieyasu Tokugawa uniting under sort of unscrupulous terms the entirety of Japan, and then he moved the capital from Kyoto to Tokyo. So it is literally a disambiguation of the exact same word. And when the capital was moved to Tokyo, it became the new capital at Edo. So that's when we talk Edo, that's what we mean. And that era stretched until 1868. So for a long time, history tells us it was a very peaceful time in Japan. The actual history tells us that that wasn't true at all. It was run by a very, very stringent military government that was kind of flooded by nepotism. And so corruption existed on all levels. But I mean, the rules they started to really grind down on these lower classes. Certain types of clothing were outlawed, certain colors were outlawed. It was just this very repressive society. And then ukiyo-e printing offered an opportunity for people to blow off a little bit of steam. And one of the things that I think I certainly didn't realize until the last couple of years about ukiyo-e by and large is that a lot of it is not to be taken at face value. Most of those images are very tongue-in-cheek. They have a lot of subtle meanings. And think about ukiyo-e in the way that we would think about sending out a mass text. At that time, there really weren't a lot of means for mass communication. But that was one. So if you had a really rigorous political cartoon that you wanted to put together and share, it was really easy to hire somebody to carve that block, hire a printer to get it out as quickly as possible and, get it out to the people. And of course, the government caught on to this. And as time went on, especially as it got closer to the Meiji Restoration, you would start seeing much heavier editing. During Edo, tattooing was allowed to flourish, but there were a number of different decrees that prohibited it. The final being during the Meiji Restoration in 1874, the tattoos were completely prohibited from being displayed in public. Some of the things that I don't think I realized prior to is if you've ever seen taiko drums, they wear, not always, but a lot of the things that they wear are a callback to Edo era craftspeople. So they wear a haragake apron, for instance, which they call by a different name when they're playing the drums, but it's the same style apron, which is a really masculine cut, very high neck, and it has cutouts that perfectly encompass the chest in the same way that the hikaye pattern on the tattoos functions. So you then see really colorful shirts that usually have tattooed patterns on them. These are called koikuchi shirts, or a fish, like a koi fish mouth shirt. But they became really commonplace once tattoos weren't able to be shown because they still gave the same effect of tattoos. And so through all of this, penal tattooing had been introduced at the beginning of Edo, and it had become much more popular as time went on. Depending on what part of Japan you lived in would kind of determine what tattoos you would receive. So let's say, in some cases you would receive one stroke out of a kanji, and one of the penal tattoos you could receive is inu, or dog, and it would be on your forehead. So it was kind of the 3 strikes and you're out. So each time you committed a crime, you would receive 1 stroke of this kanji. Another place that people would be really commonly tattooed would be on the inside of the arm. And this style of tattooing is called boke or bokuke. So it's penal tattooing, which, as tattooing became more and more and more popular, became much easier for people who had these tattoos to cover them up. And right around the beginning of Meiji, end of Edo, was the rise of another group called Yakuza. Yakuza comes from a card game, specifically, I believe the card game is called Oichokabu. It is an older pronunciation of the letters 8, 9, and 7, so it's Yakuza. or excuse me, 8, 9, and 3, Yakuza. It's the losing hand in that game. So this is sort of the name a lot of these guys rallied around, because it became easy for them to slip into the common fray with tattoos, and because of the penal codes of tattoo or associated with tattooing, and because of the Chinese influence on Japanese society, which, whether they like to admit or not, is very deep. You know, the opinion of tattooing continued to become worse and worse and worse. By 1874, it was completely illegal. It didn't become legal again until MacArthur and the occupation forces lifted it, I believe, in 1952. It might be 1948. I don't remember off the top of my head. Regardless, tattooing still happened. It happened absolutely everywhere. It became a very underground thing. And it still provided this gateway to the floating world culture of Edo. You know, tattoos being concealed under clothing, yeah, it was certainly a side effect of some of these edicts, but there was a cultural concept that existed in Edo called Iki. Iki, the concept of Iki was actually started by a group of geisha, very unusual group. They wore men's clothing, and then not in any kind of like gender bending sort of way, but they were brash. They spoke like men. They told everyone what they thought about everything. And it just really kind of brought this like, oh man, they're so cool, you know? Everybody wanted to kind of be like them. And Iki came from that. Iki was kind of like the sexy, cool way to conduct yourself. And it's not to say that it was sexual, but there were elements of it that were. And it's like the longing that two people share that can't be together. That's an Iki concept. A reservation of how you conduct yourself, knowing how to read a room, knowing your impact on the people around you. That is Iki. If your clothing covers your tattoos, for instance, you're not offending someone by them seeing this work. You're not freaking them out by seeing it, because you're aware of the impact that the work you wear has on other people. And I think there's still elements of that are really carried through in modern day Japan now. I mean, as a foreigner, it doesn't matter if you're tattooed. They don't like it any more than if you're from there. But Horimono, by and large, honors Edo by keeping the spirit of Edo alive and keeping the artwork of Edo alive, especially through the use of ukiyo-e as points of reference for a lot of this work. So it's one of these things that no matter how much time you put into it, there's always a deeper wormhole that you can go down. Sorry, I have an eyelash in my eye and it's just a treat. There we go. Without running too much further over, I can give you guys kind of a quick talk on the rest of it. At this point, does anybody have any questions about anything?
Hey, did you want to jump in? I know you've been dying to hear this.
Sorry about that. I was trying to get my mic unmuted. This is awesome, man. I really think that there's a lot of gaps that I have and a lot of knowledge with Japanese tattooing that you're already starting to fill in. And yeah, this is really good info. I have like 10,000 questions, but no questions at the same time.
Fair enough. Well, if you have anything specific, please feel free to holler. You know, again, like, I don't want this to be treated as an instruction manual or like the secrets of Irizumi or anything like that. That's not at all what the point of this was, but that's exactly it. Is like, I want people to be able to get excited about what we're doing and what we're talking about. And I mean, truly, learning is the greatest joy of all of this stuff, because no matter what, there is no such thing as learning it in one lifetime, you know, especially coming as a foreigner to this perspective. There is no way that you're going to get all of it. And that's why I love it so much, is because it's the endless rabbit hole. You know, no matter how far down you go, there's always more. But to that effect, I guess that would kind of bring us into something else that I don't feel like people discuss quite that often. And the next big chunk of the book deals with how we build this work. This was brought up to me. I did Steph Bastian's podcast last week, and that's going to be available here, I believe, in a week or two. And I'll make sure to post links on mine when that comes up. But I do talk a lot about my process. And one thing that was mentioned is that this stuff doesn't just apply to Japanese tattooing. A lot of what I talk about as far as how we build the work, I think it has everything to do with how we think about tattoos and how they fit the body. You know, and long before I knew anything about this kind of work, I always felt like when I got to do sleeves or this sort of thing, that it was like you were building custom clothing for people. And ironically, Japanese tattooing is designed using wafuku, which is traditional Japanese clothing, as the silhouettes. So although I understand, you know, why Westerners want to drop the hikaye or the chest panel, whatever we want to call it, you know, there's a reason why it's utilized. It echoes the silhouette created by the haragake apron. If we look at like a kame no ko piece, or what some would call like a turtleback, it fits the body like a turtle shell would, but it's only part of the tattoo. So as you continue to build it, you go into the sleeves, you go into the chest, you go into the front. If you do the munawari, which is the big split down the center, when you're standing at rest, if you just filled all of that space in black, it should look like a hanten coat open. Everything kind of, if you can find something in Japanese history that supports the shape of the clothing, you can almost guarantee you will find a tattoo that has a mikiri or a border that kind of corresponds to the shape of that particular piece of clothing. And so, you know, in doing this, like I've been doing this stuff for years, drawing things on the body, moving people around every time we're working. When you're doing Japanese work, that's something that I really encourage people to consider as well, is how does this stuff fit on the body? You know, it's people, I see people stenciling background on, and that to me, that's like the biggest no-no, because you've already decided, hey, this is how this fits this part of the body. This is just what we're going to do. We're committed to this. But I think using the body and remembering that it is a kinetic thing that you can move around and being able to draw in place offers you so many more options, and it doesn't feel nearly as rigid to me as when I see people just kind of plop something on there and paste it up. Another thing that I bring up at every one of my consults is the order in which I try and build this work. Traditionally in Japan, this work starts with the back. I tell people this the same every time, and it's not because I'm trying to squeeze more money out of someone. It's because you have the largest piece of uninterrupted space on your body, on your back. If you pick, or if the artist that you're working with and you pick a theme that makes sense for you, pick a narrative that makes sense for you, pick a story that makes sense for you, then that serves to inform every other part of your body. So, you know, let's say you pick a warrior theme on your back. And real quick, I just want to bring this up. Very, very rarely would you see a tattoo of what we would call samurai. That is wildly misnomered or miscalled. I don't know how to say that properly. But warrior is more the term that would be better to think about that kind of stuff with. Like samurai insinuates a very specific type of person inside of a very specific type of role. And they did not like the samurai at all. The lower classes in samurai, constant conflict all the time. The best analogy I could make it would be like us getting tattoos of like famous police officers or something. It's just not something you're going to see happen. Not to try and start shit on that conversation. It's just the closest analogy that I can make. And so more often than not, what we see, we would call musha. So you see, you know, a musha-e, or like pictures of warriors. If you see a print from the Soikoden, or if you see a print from folklore, more often than not, it's going to be musha-e. It's not going to be samurai. So just to clear that up. But let's say that that's your theme. You pick a particular warrior, so you have this musha-e piece. There's going to be a season that's affiliated with that. There are maybe animals that are affiliated with that. There may be other elements that work alongside of it. And that's only one approach. You know, you could have that piece, you could have what it means, and then as you expand into the rest of your body, you could be creating your own narrative based on traditional imagery. For instance, I have a friend whose back has to do with his zodiac. And so the rest of his suit doesn't have to do with his back, but he wanted it to be a family-focused piece. And so he's getting each of his family members as represented by their zodiac animals on his suit. So there's still continuity. There's still a reason it all works. Continuity is super important when it comes to seasonality. There is a very direct, harmonious relationship between nature and Japanese tattooing, and I think that's probably the number one thing that we overlook as Westerners. We do not understand the Japanese relationship with nature because we do not practice Shinto. Shinto is a religion, although I would argue nowadays it's maybe more of a philosophy, but Shinto and Buddhism are sort of the two main competing religions in Japan. I mean, there certainly exist others, Christianity, all of that, but Shinto was the native religion to Japan, and nature worship is one of the main principles of Shinto. And so even if people aren't religious, if you've ever been to Japan and you've ever spent time in the woods, you understand what their relationship with nature is. As I get further into the book, I talk a little bit more about that. I have been a gardener pretty much my entire life, but I've had a very specific focus on Japanese gardening over the last couple of years. I work for the Denver Botanic Gardens. I've been working in the bonsai program there for a long time. I also work in the Japanese garden there. I have a number of private clients in the Denver area that I do maintenance and restoration work for, because during the 50s and 60s, there were a tremendous amount of Japanese American citizens here who had landscaping companies. A lot of those properties have kind of gone to pot, and so I'm back trying to help do the restoration work on this stuff. I work for clients up in Aspen. I work for a temple down in Boulder. I stay pretty busy with this stuff, and usually I'm doing it before I go into work. Doing gardening has given me, at that level, has given me a much deeper appreciation for literally every step of bodysuit tattooing. If I'm designing a bonsai, I don't think about what it's going to look like today. I have to think about what it's going to look like in 3 years or in 5 years. It's like you're playing chess, but you also have this custodial relationship with this thing because it's living. You have to care for it every single day. If you don't water it, it doesn't survive. It teaches you all kinds of lessons about how to be flexible. I mentioned this the other day on one of the podcasts I did last week, but I usually store my trees in the garage over the winter. I had one of my favorites sitting near my shelving. I don't know what happened. I think something must have fallen inside of the house, but it knocked a huge piece of wood off of my shelving, fell right onto the top of the tree, broke the entire top half of the tree off. All of us have messed up in a tattoo, you know what I mean? And that's like, oh, okay, well, that's what black's for. I didn't handle that very gracefully for a really long time when I was tattooing. And I'm sitting here staring at this bonsai that I've spent 8 years working on with the top of the tree laying next to it where it's broken off. And I look at it and I go, cool, opportunity. I sat down, I redesigned the tree. And since it was damaged and since the redesign, I think it's 1,000 times better than it was, you know, as I had it. But I didn't make that choice. You know, clients are going to make and break the energy of your tattoo all day long. With bonsai, they only survive if I'm there to help them. With my clients, we have a custodial relationship in a sense until I finish the work for them. But people really do need to understand what it is that they're committing to. And part of why I wrote this was to help people understand, hey, this is not something that's going to be done tomorrow. You are not going to be the same person you were when you started this process. Everything about this is wildly transformative. And I think it's more important than just having the theme correct and the seasons correct and, you know, this, that, and the third correct. You need to have your mindset correct. You need to really consider what the work is that you're doing. I mean, I've been at this for 24 years. I still feel weird about charging what I charge from time to time, as silly as that sounds, because I can't think of anything else I would rather be doing, and being able to be there with those people in those moments. It's the best. You know, doing the gardening work, somebody comes in, hey, I got this whole thing drawn out for you, we're ready to go. Actually, I changed my mind. Okay, let's switch gears, let's make it work, you know. All of this stuff kind of helps us find a flow state for how we work. And I think once you've gotten to that 20-year mark in tattooing, you probably work in flow state a lot of the time. I feel like you're pulling your hair out every waking moment of the day. You've got a little bit of sense of how you move through the world of tattoo and how you operate with your clients. And I think that is something that people don't really understand that well out here either. And the Japanese have a concept called shokunin. Shokunin is, we would translate that word as craftsman, but I don't think that that really illustrates the depth of the word. Shokunin is, some of you maybe have seen the movie Jiro, Dreams of Sushi. Jiro is the perfect example of what it is to be shokunin. He does the same thing every single day. He strives to be his personal best constantly. They make sushi. He doesn't go to the same person to buy every kind of fish he gets. He doesn't go to the same person to buy the kinds of rice. He goes to specialists for every single thing he does. And then by going to a specialist, then he is able in turn to take all of that stuff and create the best possible product that he can give to people. And he does this by repeating the same thing day in and day out. Obviously, this is the West. We believe in rugged individualism. It's a little bit harder to get our heads behind a concept like that. But the person that I moved to Colorado to work with, Joel Long, I mean, Joel illustrates that concept better than almost any other Westerner I've ever met. I don't think I've ever met anyone who works as hard as that guy or as dedicated just to tattooing and doesn't care about any of it, doesn't care about being famous, doesn't care if people know his name. It doesn't matter. He is completely content to be doing what he does and serving his community in that way. And I'm really fortunate that I got to work with him and that he did my back for me, because it helped kind of beat some of that stuff into my head, even if he would never use that word or we don't have the language for it, you know, because we don't. I think that's the beauty of being able to kind of look outside of our culture a little bit, is that there's so many concepts that we relate to, but we don't always know how to talk about. And again, one of the things that I really hope that this book accomplishes is offering people terminology that they can use in real world situations, and not to sound like an expert, but just to sound like you've got some confidence in what it is you're talking about. And maybe what this book does is helps keep people away from making these tattoos that shouldn't be, you know. That's the other side of it. Like, none of us are here to say you should be doing this, you shouldn't be doing this. I'm not Japanese. I mean, again, it's really hard for me to say, oh, this is what's right or this is what's wrong. I know members of families, but I'm not tied to any specific family. I don't do tabori, you know, so I would never say that I do traditional Japanese tattooing. I just do work that's really heavily influenced by it. But throughout my process and throughout writing all of this, not just the book, but throughout writing all the stuff on the website and traveling to Japan, my God, like that's the most important thing you could do, hands down. But really taking all of that and trying to just smash it all into one thing that just sort of gives people a glimpse into, hey, this is what I've been able to condense from 23 years of this and study and work and travel. Again, I really hope it's useful. There's an 8-page glossary in the back of it that I think will definitely help people just with terminology, because sometimes, you know, you can go on Google and be like, oh, well, hey, what is this thing called when you do this? And it sort of looks like that, or it's this or that. You can be real vague in your descriptions, but now it's like, okay, what is this exact word? What does this mean? What is this process? And for me, when I started researching some of this stuff, it just kept taking me further and further down rabbit holes. And I hope it does the same for everybody else, because I mean, it really is absolutely fascinating. There is absolutely no way that you could wrap your head around this inside of one lifetime. And for people that like to read and like to study, I mean, the opportunity is there in spades. It truly is. I know I'm getting kind of close to the end of my time, so I just want to let everybody know the book will be coming out second week of August is the best I have right now. I believe we're looking at August 9th, but don't quote me on that. It is going to be available through Afterlife Press. That's afterlifepress.com. For anybody that's interested, if you go to afterlifepress.com's website right now, you can register for our mailing list. That keeps everybody up to date on what's actually happening in Afterlife's world, because this is certainly not the only project that they have on. But it will also open an opportunity for whoever is on the mailing list to get an advanced purchase option. So if this is something you really want, I will say we do not have a ton of copies. I will not say how many, but it is a limited run this run. So if it's something you're interested in, you want to be sure you get a copy, get on that mailing list, and that will get you to the front of the list. If you have any questions for me that you don't want to ask right now, you can always reach me at my website. That's traditiontattooing.com. My email is traditiontattooing@gmail.com. I'm on Instagram as Dutch Raven, and my studio is on Instagram as studio.matsukaze, Matsukaze. So feel free to check us out. Obviously, we're going to be putting all kinds of stuff up here in the next couple of weeks. Steph Bastian's podcast should be coming out in 2 or 3 weeks. I did another one with John Miro that should be out in another couple of weeks. And like I said, we'll be looking at that early August release date. I have a couple minutes left, so if anybody does have any questions, now is a great time. Please feel free to fire away.
Dave, we got one in the comments. Where can we find more information about Aiki that I said that wrong? That you mentioned the specific book resource. Thank you. Do you see that in the comment?
I wasn't looking. Give me one sec. There are a number of different things that you can read about Iki. Give me just one sec. I have that here in the back. There are a couple of different essays written on it. I apologize, it's taking me a sec here. Here we go. Hiroshi Nara and Shuzo Kuki. It's called The Structure of Detachment, the Aesthetic Vision of Kuki Shuzo. So anything by Kuki Shuzo is the Japanese way. So anything by Shuzo Kuki. He wrote, I believe, the original treatise on Iki, although there are a couple of conflicting opinions on that, because I think his is a bit more sexual, and I think there are others that kind of that deviate a little bit more from that. I know one of the sexual points that he brings up, and I found this absolutely fascinating. I did mention this last week as well. Parallel patterns. Usually another thing that we misnomer constantly are geisha. Most of the time we see these women in tattoos. Geisha, like samurai, is a very specific role. What we generally see would be called bijinga. Bijinga is more like a beautiful woman. But a lot of the times you'll see, and men wore these as well, but you'll see these more often on women, I find, in ukiyo-e particularly. The patterns on their clothing are consisting of parallel lines. Parallel lines represent sexual tension, because you have these two that are just constantly chasing each other, but they never actually touch. So it's this sort of longing and back and forth. Iki is about a lot of tension. It's like you could act on it, but you choose not to, and that reservation makes you cooler. It makes you more slick. It's more haute couture. It's more in style with the way people are doing things. So to give you a really long-winded version of that.
Thanks, Dave.
Of course.
I'm going to change the view really quick and let people be a little less shy. So it's up here. They always move stuff around.
Another thing that I want to talk about super quickly is Mingei. For those of you that aren't aware of Mingei, I would argue that Horimono at its core is folk art. It is. It is democratized art. It is art by the people, for the people. It is certainly swept under the rug by popular society. And I delved in a couple of those reasons. I would not say that those are the only reasons. Mingei was a movement that started in Japan in the early 20th century. There were a group of philosophers who had been spending a lot of time examining art objects and traveling back and forth between Japan and Korea, because the Japanese and Korean relationships at that time were deteriorating rapidly. And in those studies had started paying attention to, I believe it's Ye, like Y-E, I don't speak Korean, so I'm not sure if it's Ye or Yi, dynasty porcelain. It's one of the longest running dynasties in Korea, and they produced a tremendous number of works. And so in Tokyo, there is a place called the Mingei Museum, and it is a museum dedicated entirely to craft objects and to the people who make those objects. And I feel like, even though the Japanese might not think of it that way by and large, that Horimono is Mingei in its truest sense. As I say, it is democratized art. It is art that is not done for fame or fortune. It's done for transformation. Anyway, just a quick aside. I know I don't want to keep cutting into everybody else's time, but
we got time for one more question. Ryan had his hand up, Dave. Ryan,
what you got?
I had like 3 questions. I seen Lars is raising his hand as well. So mine is, have you ever heard of the term shuhari?
Of course.
Oh, okay, cool. Does that apply with tattooing, at least in the Japanese culture?
I would say that's almost the essence of it.
It is? Okay, cool.
But it's also, I mean, that's kind of a gray area, you know. I found myself, I wouldn't say in trouble recently, but under some criticism because of the way I do my backgrounds. I have the influences I have, and it was brought to my attention that at times that might look a little too similar to someone from another family's background, and that I might want to consider changing that. But when I explained the logic behind why it was the way it was, Shuhari is the answer. I mean, truly, you know, when I started working with Joel, he gave me the Horiyoshi 2 books to study and said, here, I want you to read these, draw absolutely everything in them. I would also argue that those are 2 of the most important books that any student of Japanese tattooing can own. I understand they're expensive. It is an investment in your future. Doesn't matter. But that was what I did. I went through every single one of those books, you know, drew every one of those pieces. And the more that you do it, the more you're able to start doing it without thinking, you know. But at first, of course, you're going to have things that look like someone else's style. And personally, I don't find anyone's style stronger than Horiyoshi 2. Although Horitoshi, I would say, is my favorite living Japanese tattooer. I think Horiyoshi 2 embodied everything that I appreciate about this work. And just so people know, Horiyoshi 2, Horiyoshi 3, absolutely not the same, not related at all, just to clear that up. But so yeah, Shuhari is definitely a principle I would say that you see very, very regularly, and not just in Japanese tattooing.
Thanks, Dave.
Of course.
And I was going to find the link for it, but can you, if the books are just called Horiyoshi 2 books, they were published by Ed Hardy. Are those the ones you're talking about?
They are. They were published by Ed Hardy with Kiyokuniya. What is it? Kinokuniya? No. Oh my God, Kaibunsha, excuse me. Kaibunsha is the publisher. Kaibunsha did a lot of publishing at that time, really heavy focus in the 80s into the 90s. Those books are called Horiyoshi's World, but it's Horiyoshi 2's World. Got to be really careful. There's a lot of those out there. So just make sure you're getting the one that you want. I mean, all of them are wonderful to have in your collection. The Horiyoshi 2 books are wildly important, as well as Gifu Horihide Drawings for Tattoos Volume 1 and 2. Almost impossible to find these days. If you are able to, do it. Because you got wonderful drawings, wonderful stories. You have every explanation you could almost ever need for anything thematically, and it's also in English. These were $100 when they came out in 2000, and I remember being at the Unimax store and going, $100 for a book? Well, now they're $1,700 a piece. So, you know, one of those kinds of things. If you can find them, definitely keep an eye out. Those will help you tremendously.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, I've spent a bunch of money on books, and Brad always said that if you do one tattoo out of them, you're going to be okay.
Exactly.
Makes
You know,
sense.
they are an investment.
Lars, do you want to slip your comment in before we wish Dave and thank Dave for his presentation? Because it was fucking tops. It was
Sorry if I rambled too much.
Captivating.
Lots to talk about.
No, I mean, I talk to you all the time, Dave, and I don't think I've ever been as captivated as before. There's really great presentation. Lars, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I love it. That's awesome.
What's up, buddy?
Again, hey, real quick. So Horikyo, right, was the Japanese tattooer that came to the West in the 1880s, right?
Yeah, you're talking about like the Beauty and Violence,
Like
books?
the floating. I think so. The float. I guess mostly what I'm thinking about is like when, like, how do you see? Not, I mean, obviously, it deeply influenced the Western perspective forever. Outside that and Horihide's like meeting Sailor Jerry, but I especially find interest in like early Western translations, like especially among like you know someone like George Burchett, as he like
Sure.
was in that.
You're talking Horichio.
Horichio.
Yeah, not Horikyo. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, and it's funny because to me, he is the George Burchett of Japanese tattooing, you know?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
I don't think it was the 1880s, though. I thought it was later than that because he committed suicide. His story is pretty crazy. I thought it was the earlier part of the 20th century, and I could totally be wrong.
It's totally possible. I'm just kind of like running solely on memory with this.
No. All good.
But really, I guess what I'm asking is like, how did you see, like, how much influence in those early days do you think that the Japanese bodysuit and like the horimono and stuff like that had on the Western perspectives?
I mean, man, that's a really great question. I don't think we understood it at all, because when those guys started leaving, the reason a lot of them started traveling, and it could have been that he started in the 1880s, because as I said, 1874 tattoo bans started going into place. And so a lot of those guys did end up leaving and trying their luck elsewhere. But a lot of what I've found didn't really show evidence of bodysuit tattooing outside of Japan. It was more Japanese imagery being done on mostly on aristocracy. It was all the wealthy people were the ones that were getting these tattoos, but a lot of it was just one-off kind of stuff. I don't know of anyone who bridged that gap before Horihide and Jerry, and we were fortunate enough to actually spend some time with Horihide last year, who no longer goes by that name. It's Kazuo Gori now. We're going to be back in November, and I think we're going to go do some castle tour with him as well. He's amazing. He's 92 or 93. Dude, it's insane. That guy has so much damn energy.
You can still buy his paintings, and they're hella cheap, honestly, for what they.
I mean, when we went to his apartment, and it wasn't like, here's a couple paintings to look at. It was like, here's a stack of paintings like this. I mean, I must have been an hour and a half just flipping through them, and I bought quite a few. Buy his paintings. He can't tattoo. Go support him. People don't really seem to understand how important that guy was to tattooing and how important he is. And he gets a lot of kind of undue hate inside of Japan as well. People are like, oh, it's the technical stuff. There's a lot of criticism that's thrown towards him, and I'm not entirely certain that I understand why, because Gifu tattooing and Tokyo tattooing are not the same thing at all.
I've studied.
So it's hard. Sorry.
Oh, I ended up being lucky enough to have an unfinished painting by him, as well as a series of like 25 back pieces and photographs.
Yeah, that's awesome. I got a couple big ones here from him, and I mean, I was just blown away. He's like, oh yeah, just every day, this is what I do. He was super funny. He didn't talk a ton about Jerry. He talked a lot about Ed. That was pretty funny. He took us out for some eel donbori, and he was making fun of Ed. He's like, oh man, that was his favorite thing. He's like, when he first came here, he was really skinny. When he left, he was fat. You know? He's like, don't eat too much rice, you know? Okay. But yeah, it's really cool to know that people like that are still alive, and that you can still bridge that gap. All it takes is literally just write the guy on Instagram. He's very, very easy. He'll send you out whatever you want as quick as you can. Support people like that. Truly support them.
Thanks, Dave. We're gonna wrap this section up, but before we do, I just need to say that was powerful. I don't know what people expected when they hear someone wrote a book on Japanese. There is so much, and I'll be less nice. There's so much regurgitation out there. It's just always packaged differently. And you kind of mentioned it. It's like ordering from Taco Bell. It's the same thing, just in a different wrapper. And this was very refreshing and really filled in the gaps. And I think my biggest takeaway from this is that you can't just do Japanese tattooing by regurgitating Japanese tattooing. Go walk in the woods before you draw. Go to a Japanese garden before you draw. Go look at the drawings that other people have done and really start
to Japan.
Yeah, go to Japan. Not all
That's
of us.
The most important.
Yeah, I don't think as many. I was lucky enough to go there in 97 and 98. And it opened up my eyes to flow, to energy, to all the things that go deeper than just, I can't believe this motherfucker didn't show up for his appointment type bullshit. You know, not being flexible, not having change. Like Americans really did capitalize on tattooing. We're the first person that said, wonderful experience, give me $5 and you can remember it forever. You know, and there's definitely a different sense of Japanese tattooing. And what you did today and what you did in this book, I think is going to be a staple in most people's who are really seriously following this. They're going to be able to read your book and then go back and look at some of that imagery and be able to see it in a new light. And I just want to thank you for taking the time to do that. Tattooing needs voices. It needs to continue our history, and it needs people like in this room to keep talking amongst ourselves to keep keep pushing what came before us. So what you did is awesome.
Well, thank you. And to that effect, depending on how this does, we're certainly in position that we can do reprints quickly, but depending on the use, I'm also kicking around pretty hard doing a Spanish language version as well, because I have a ton of folks that I speak with very regularly down there that have kind of expressed interest. And so, support it, help the project kind of get out there a little bit, and hopefully we can start getting this out. Accessibility was really important to me with this, so also keep an ear out for an audiobook coming, probably not until next year or so, but just in case people have a hard time with the actual reading, I understand. So audiobook shouldn't be too far off.
Thanks,
and if
Sam.
anybody has any questions or anything at any point, just hit me up and I'm sure you'll list some of those sources and stuff.
Yeah, we're going to repost this on the YouTube channel. I'll make sure that if you're following my Instagram or Jackpot's Instagram, that you'll know that it's alive. And with that, before we move on to the next section, which is Ryan, I just want to let anyone know who's not a member yet. I'm just going to share something really quick. This is my screen I'm going to share. This is what we do in Jackpot. This is one of the funnest things about it, which is we have all these meetings. Over here on the right-hand side, you can see all the meetings that we have coming up. And one of the beautiful things is we have all the recorded meetings over here. And Dave has another meeting inside of here that you can search for and get a lot of good information. It's a speaker meeting. We do our best to organize all this. So if I click speaker here, it won't be that hard to scroll down and find Dave right here. And here's one of Dave's meetings that he did in February with us. So there's we do our best to add the terminology that was used. So even if you don't watch all the videos in there, there's a huge resource library inside of Jackpot that we're trying to build for the common tattooer so that we can work together to be stronger together. That's the whole point of all of it. So let me stop sharing this, and I want to bring in Ryan. Ryan is, I don't know how else to put it, Ryan, but you're a science geek or a science nerd. There's no other way to put it, but I say that with all affinity, with all the love that, some people, again, like I mentioned with Dave, sometimes we get into these things where when we are a student of our craft, I remember being told my third or fourth year in tattooing, I felt burnt out, right? And I remember being told by someone I looked up to that how can you be burnt out on something that has so many facades or so many angles or so many different routes and so many different directions to study? And then in one lifetime, you're never going to know everything about tattooing. And so that's what I like about this group in this room right now is everyone, we're going to be talking about a couple different things. And in particular, Ryan's rabbit hole that he went down was more on the science side of why does this do that? And so Ryan is a self-proclaimed science geek. We've become good friends. And Ryan even has his own section inside of Jackpot, and he runs his meetings that deal with the science side of things as well. So he's also an instructor and an educator. So with that, Ryan, I want to hand it over to you, and I'm going to turn it on speaker mode for you and try to shoot for about 20 to 25 minutes, 30 minutes. And then we'll move on to our next section. And then that way everyone still feels energized by tonight, and we'll want to do this again. So Ryan, all yours, the floor is yours, my friend.
Okay, cool. I had made some slides that I'm going to post inside the group instead of showing them just on the video, because it turned into a bit of a behemoth. I'm working on a book right now that's describing color tattooing and all the science behind it. And this is just a section out of it. And I think it pulled up like 38 slides. And I think that's too much, unless you guys want me to speed read through this and you can't ask any questions. Everyone has to stay on mute until I'm done, which I know we don't really want to get into all that anyways. When I started researching a lot of this stuff about 5 or 6 years ago, I was lucky enough to talk to some people who, manufacture pigments, people who mix pigments and do other stuff. And when I started tattooing, what got me into all this stuff is I used to ask a lot of questions. In fact, I had asked so many questions so many times that I have been fired by 5 different shops because I just wanted to figure out what the hell was going on. And, people said that they knew what they were talking about. And I just kept asking the word why, right? And that's why I find that you can find people know what they're talking about or not, right? If you keep asking them why, like a 3-year-old, eventually they're going to get mad because they may not know what they're fucking talking about. So I have a thought that tonight like I wanted to just go crazy into science and use all the big words, you know, because I'm so excited about this stuff. But I know that no one really cares about, you know, degradation pathways of chromophores, you know, and like what is the necessary requirements, or like what energy levels photons required to like break down a chromophore. So I'm going to do this as basic as possible. I want to keep it short and sweet, because I know what everyone thinks when they think about color tattoos is, well, which one should I use? And the answer is, I don't know. Like, no one knows. That's the biggest thing, right? There's a few things that we need to know when we're getting into color tattoos, because I think we've all heard, like, if you do a color tattoo, it's going to fade fast, right? Colors fade, just do something in black and gray, it lasts forever. And in essence, that's correct, but it's not quite the full picture, right? But color tattoos, when they're applied to human bodies, it's not uniform. It's not like we're doing it on a canvas, right? Everyone's skin is different. They all live in different places. There's different environments. They have different jobs. They're different ages. They do different things. And each one of those things that they expose themselves to is going to affect that color, right? Even if we take a picture under warm light or cool light or pure white light, it makes it look different. And that's because color is really, really, really sensitive to its environment, right? So we're going to break this down to two classes with color, right? We have inorganic and organic pigments. Has anyone ever heard about this? We give hands up or head shakes or whatever, right? Okay. So organic pigments are not cruelty-free and found at New Seasons Market or Whole Foods. They contain carbon. It's organic is just a carbon-based thing. It's a chemistry term, right? Inorganic pigments do not contain carbon. And usually what happens is inorganic pigments are made from minerals, right? Things that you may find just on the ground, rocks and salt, and like white, like titanium dioxide is a rock that's found. It's like the second or third most abundant rock on the planet. It's rutile or anatase. It's just a white rock. What they do is they take it and they pulverize it until it gets really, really small, and then they suspend it in a carrier fluid and you inject it into somebody's body, and that makes white sometimes, which we can get into that more later. Black is carbon, right? So it would be a carbon-based thing, but it's just carbon. The process of making it is unique to each place where you're going to buy it. If you buy carbon in Japan, it's not going to be the same type of carbon that you're going to find in the United States, right? Most of the blacks that we use and source here are made from byproducts of petroleum distillation and natural gas production, right? The byproducts of that, you burn something, the carbon is released from hydrocarbons, and they will collect that, and then they put it into a bottle, and that's your black pigment, right? If we get colors like red, if you have an azo-based pigment, which is an organic pigment, you have to take a whole bunch of liquid chemicals together and you mix them in certain ratios, and then it'll output this product that makes red. That's it, right? So thinking about if things are organic or inorganic, oh, thanks, Vivi, are not, it's not like you're being cruelty-free and trying to save the planet, right? All that they are is just, they're talking about the chemical structures of it. Now, through modern testing, there is a light fastness scale that is applied to stuff. Now, the colors that we use in tattooing are also used in paints, that you're used in, you know, photocopiers. They put it on cars, they put it on signs, they put it on sidewalks. It's all the same base. And there's not very many manufacturers nowadays that actually produce these products at large. When we buy pigment from like companies like Intense or Fusion or whatever, right? They all are not manufacturing the raw pigments. They buy the raw pigments, purchase them from these big companies, and then they mix them, they bottle them, and then they sell these products, right? So the issues with these products come into play where, one, in the industry, we have no light fastness scale, because modern like organic pigments that we have, like azo pigments or disazo pigments, which are classified. If you look at the bottle, you'll see a CI number, right? CI is a color index number. If it starts with a 1 or a 2, it's an organic pigment, right? You look at those and then you can see it. Most modern pigments, the other way you can check to see is if it looks way too surreal, like if that red is just so friggin' red, you've never seen that red before, it's probably an organic pigment. You can always tell, because if you look at like traditional tattoos, they look a little bit more flat, a little bit more matte, and they usually are pretty well saturated, and they tend to fade and cool as they age, right? While modern pigments actually tend to fade away, which is going to be the organics versus the inorganics. Anyways, getting sidetracked here. Sorry. I did have a drink before we started. So when we're trying to pick our colors, we're trying to think of things of light fastness. There's no scale. Right now, the there's like a testing that's going on. It's been taking the past 4 years, where most major like paint companies that sell for artistic supplies have supplied their paints to a testing company, the ASTM board certified something or others, right? And what they do is they take that paint and they roll it on a piece of cotton, and then they go out to Arizona and they stick it in the sun and they see how long it takes it to fade. Because the sun in Arizona is really strong, right? The amount of energy that's coming from the sun is so direct and it's so intense, it'll cause a breakdown of those pigments. And so they start grading them based on how fast they fade over 1 week, 3 months, 6 months, a year, 3 years. And so they're coming to the end of this right now. And at the end of this, hopefully we're actually going to have some reliable test data telling us which colors are going to be not light fast versus which ones are. In the interim, we have anecdotal experience that tells us which colors do and don't work. One, we know without a fact that inorganic pigments last longer than organic pigments. There's some really heavy science as to why this happens. It actually goes down to their atomic structure and how they interact with photons. And photons are just light, right? The light that moves at different wavelengths that creates, visible whatever stuff. But it also makes like gamma radiation and infrared and microwaves. It's those photons end up hitting a molecule, exciting it, and then that gives off the appearance of color, which our eyes actually take in, right? We don't have like red and blue photons. It's just different wavelengths of energy. So when they hit this stuff, they break it down, certain colors just fade faster. And we found that through some studies, which we've done some ourselves over here, you have colors like orange, brown, and magenta are like the most common to fade colors. The orange specifically is one of the least light fast colors that you could ever find. Once it hits the body, especially if you have pale skin, which that's going to be the mitigating factor for this. If you have melanin versus not, you have less ability to absorb all that energy that's coming into play with you, right? So the lighter your skin, usually the faster that organic colors will end up fading. Anyway, so orange has a shelf life of 1 to 3 years with direct sunlight in a place where there's like direct sunlight. Like if you live in a desert area closer to the equator, versus somewhere maybe that's a little bit more northern, those colors will fade a lot faster, especially if you have no pigment right in your skin. Browns as well, just the chemical structure of them are extremely weak. And then you have the idea of spectral versus non-spectral colors, which we don't have to get into that, which is like either additive or reductive. Like non-spectral colors, you're going to get like magentas, things like that, where they are required to be they only show when enough light has been removed for them to actually anyways, I'm not going to go into that. It's fucking too much. Sorry. Those colors tend to
jump
fade
in real quick, Ryan, and clarify something real quick. When you say that like orange lasts 1 to 3 years, we're talking like if not as a tattoo per se, but as if the tattoo was in the sun for 24 hours a day for 3 years. That's more what you're talking about, right?
No, like literally, like the minute that you put it in, depending on the concentrations of pigment that you put in your skin, the orange starts to fade instantaneously. And it can actually be affected by LED lights in your house. So modern LED lights actually have a high UV output, but they're on the range that our eyes can't pick up. So like if you have pigment and you store it out on a shelf because you think it looks pretty, don't do that. It breaks down. You got to put it somewhere dark and out of the way, right? But no, orange breaks down really quickly. It depends on the concentration value of the amount of pigment that you put in the skin. When traditional tattooers would say bold will hold, like they were absolutely correct. It goes down to saturation, right? The more pigment that you shove into an area, the more that pigment can actually buffer itself against the intrusions of ultraviolet light or other stressors, right? And I think we've all, like most of us may have been around long enough where we would seen watercolor tattoos that were done back in the day, right? People would wash out a color and it would fade really quickly. And if it was washed out from a solid concentration that was next to it, you could actually see it fade in real time quite quickly. The more that you put in next to each other and the more solid that structure is with all of the pigment that you shove into it, the stronger that it is no longer to hold. So if you have good concentrations of orange pigment in the skin, it will last longer. If it's washed, I mean, you could have 6 months and it will disappear. Same with magentas, same with browns. The bad thing is the byproduct of those organic pigments when they break down, it releases carcinogens in your body. And it's known. And that's why the EU was doing a bunch of stuff like trying to ban pigments, because they're like, these ones are really bad. And we know that they could cause issues in the future, right? So mark those on your list. The easiest way to get around that if you need to use orange for a tattoo is mix it. Especially if you're going to be using some of those organic pigments. Just remember, it's a CMYK versus RGB profile. You will mix a magenta and a yellow. to make an orange, right? You don't mix red and yellow because you're going to get a pink, right? You have to play around with some of your colors to do this stuff. If you manufacture an orange that isn't using a strict orange pigment, it actually lasts longer. Same with flesh tones, right? Flesh tones often use a magenta base, and they're going to build off of it with a white and a blue and maybe some other type of color, right? Maybe some reds, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're manufacturing them yourselves, instead of using those ones that are single base on top of it, they tend to last longer, and they actually are more efficacious depending on the skin tone. I'm going crazy here and talking and trying to cram like 6 hours into 30 minutes. So does anyone have any questions so far?
Well, I'll help keep the conversation going. So what I'm hearing you say is that there are some best practices to eliminate the inevitability of light fast. And the first one is storage. If you're keeping it in a dark place, you're at least keeping the light fast as positive as possible before it has a chance to be tattooed, because it doesn't have to be in the skin for the degradation to start happening. And what we're talking about isn't just that the tattoo falls out. The particles are still in the skin, just the light fast has made those particles less orange, correct?
Yeah, they stop showing color. Like there's a diarylide yellow. That's a CI number starting with a 2 that you'll see with yellow pigments, and its structure is really interesting. It's kind of beautiful, almost looks like some bat wings coming off. The center part of it is a double bonded nitrogen. Anyways, I don't have to go into this. There's an atomic structure in the middle that has 2 wings that are connected to it, and where those wings are connected is kind of a weak bond. So when a photon hits it, it interacts with it, it bounces back out, it'll emit the color that we perceive as yellow. But that structure is extremely weak, right? So the more times it gets hit and the more times it has to output that color, the weaker that structure gets. It's almost like you've built a bridge out of toothpicks, right? If you start removing some of the side structures one at a time, like that's each time a photon hits it, eventually it becomes so weak that it just crumbles. That doesn't mean that the bridge isn't still there. It's just not a bridge anymore, right? And that's the problem that we have with the breakdown of the pigments that we're using, especially these organic ones, is that when they go into the body and they start to degrade, where do those degradation pathways go, right? Because it's almost lost the ability to stay permanent. It's not just staying in the body and the body's immune system and structural abilities are like holding in place. It's now become so weak that it can actually be pulled into the body and stored in different tissues. And that's scary, right? So, yeah.
So what you're trying to say here, really quick, what you're trying to say here is, with the idea of like taking a pure orange from a manufacturer, which is probably the same orange that 3 other manufacturers got from the same big vat of orange in some weird company. What you're saying is that since we know that orange breaks down faster, you can actually kind of sidestep that by taking 2 of your base colors and mixing them together, which would be the yellow and the magenta. And what I also hear you saying is this quite clearly to me, and I'm not trying to push an agenda here, but you ever wonder why there's 40 million colors from one company, and should we trust all 40 million colors? And are you saying that the best practice is actually to figure out what the base colors are and try to create your palette off your base colors and not use the third party to mix your colors for you?
Yeah. Back in the day before predispersed colors, which you're not supposed to mix, we had to mix all of our own stuff, right? If you wanted a light blue, you would take a blue concentrate and you would add white to it. And nowadays, it's so complex, pigment chemistry. Like they'll use different sizes of particles of white pigment, right? Some that may be 185 nanometers in diameter, some that are 238 nanometers in diameter, because they refract light differently. So they'll add them to these different blues or these different oranges or different reds to add and make different tones, right? But adding white to any of these organic pigments actually speeds up how fast that they age, right? It's kind of funny. It's like taking a magnifying glass in the sun and holding it over and trying to, kill a bug or something, right? It amplifies the light that's coming in. So every time you're adding white to a pigment, it actually speeds its degradation pathways. Using darker, truer tones that aren't tinted up last longer regardless. So, yeah, I mean, it is. Companies buy by the fucking ton. They don't buy by the ounce or by the pound like we do if we're mixing our own pigments. They buy these huge things. And the chemical processes that go into making some of these pigments are hyper complex. I mean, they'll use products like chlorine and benzene to make like an orange or a yellow or a red, right? And when they mix them in a vat, they don't get 100% mixture with that stuff. There's always going to be some waste. And this is why, like, for years, I've been pushing for purity controls. Like, we should have tests that are applied to each one of the pigments so we know how pure that they are. And those don't exist. When you buy lot A, it may have 99% purity and your colors come out and they're absolutely gorgeous. You buy from the same company 3 months later, it may have a 60% purity. And those colors may come out and they may actually cause issues inside the body, right? So it really is a guessing game for how these things are going to work. And once this testing is actually done and released, we'll have a better idea about what colors are going to work best. The easiest way to do this, to find anything, if you're trying to figure out what's going to work best versus not, is you go onto your computer with your bottle in hand, find the CI number, type it into Google, and look at what it is. If you look at what it is, look at the chemical structure. If you see it's some crazy spirally thing with just like a whole bunch of appendages and looks like an octopus, the thing's not going to be stable. If it's something that looks very, very clean, almost like a snowflake, it's very well balanced, very tight together, those are going to hold up better, right? Like we have phthalocyanine blue, like blue 15-3, right? The one that was banned over in Europe. That is one of the most light fast pigments that has been used for hundreds of fucking years. It's amazing. I mean, like the general light fastness scale on this is 150 years before any type of tinting and degrading happens. So the same with black, right? Black, if you look at carbon black, it's just, it looks like a snowflake. That stuff is really good at capturing and holding energy. It's absorptive as all hell. It can hold a lot of energy and not break down. That's why black lasts so long. If you look at like red 210, it's just like this little nugget. It doesn't stand up well to stresses, but when you put enough of it together, it becomes extremely light fast. So colors like that, you can't wash out and use. This is hyper complex when we get into it. But I mean, realistically, if it's darker, it'll probably last longer. Is the thing you need to know, right? If it's really light, it's probably going to fade away, except for one yellow. There's
so what
one
is the
yellow.
best practice?
Oh my
Obviously,
gosh.
we can't do all tattoos dark. So if I walk away from this conversation, what are some of the best practices I can do to ensure that when I tattoo a 25-year-old person, when they turned 45, their kids go, wow, that tattoo still looks good on mom. I want to get tattooed by the person who tattooed my mom. So what are, when you're telling us all this stuff in today's world, what are some of the best practices we need to be thinking about when it comes to light fast, when it comes to the degradation of color because of UV rays?
Okay, so one is saturation counts. Make sure if you're using a color fully saturated. If you don't, like, never wash out your colors. If you're going to wash out a color, use a gray, something that has white and black in it. Black absorbs, right? So it's going to decrease the amount of energy that's coming in. Don't just use white or black. Use a gray to tint it down and up. That's what you do, right? So saturation, watch your tints, and then also watch your depth. A lot of us are prone to, like, if it's not going in, bury the needle and try to get it in as far as you can. And that can work in some instances with some pigments on some people, but the majority of the time is you don't have to work that hard. If your pigment isn't going in correctly, you may not have mixed it right. Maybe your needles aren't going in right. Maybe your angle of insertion isn't correct. There's a whole bunch of technical things that may be going on with that. Our want is to deposit the pigment in the upper layer of the dermis, which is only 40 micrometers thick, the epidermis that you have to get through, which is like a human hair. You can cut it into like even pieces, and like one of those pieces is how thick the protective layer is of our skin. That's it. You don't have to work hard to actually get it into the skin. If you deposit at the right depth, you have good saturation, and it's not overloaded with white, things will last longer. Past that, client care, sunscreen, right? Wearing loose fitting like clothing that has like light and color, white preferably, right? Because it'll end up reflecting and refracting a lot of that light off. That's good for long-term stuff. And then also having a good care routine. If you don't have a good care routine when the tattoo leaves the shop, and you think like, oh, put Aquaphor or Vaseline on it 6 times a day is going to work, that's not going to be good for someone's skin. So you're setting the tattoo up to fade before it's even fully healed, because the body is going to stay open for longer and it's going to lose more pigment.
No. So what you're saying is the care routine is you're trying to get that body to seal before anything has a chance to degrade or even fall out at that point.
Yeah, but it's an open wound.
Yeah.
Right. There's no protection over top of the tattoo. If you can get a tattoo to heal in 7 days, the color is going to look more vibrant for longer than if it took 3 months to heal. We've all seen it. You've seen tattoos that come out chewed up and they're nasty and they're deep and they just look gross. right?
What about pre-tattoo? Should we start to even think on that level of like helping our clients pre-tattoo, like giving them
Oh, yeah.
instructions on how to like get their skin ready to be tattooed? I mean, an
Yep.
artist will spend hours stretching canvas and putting gesso on it, but we just go, "What do you got?" We'll work with what we got and we tattoo them. And what I'm hearing you say is we actually should, if we have appointments, if we're working by appointment, we should maybe even consider how to help them prep their skin for their big day. Is that true?
Yeah, pre-care is really important if you have the chance to do it. And if not, make sure that you ask the question like to your client, like, do you have a care routine already? Like, do you put lotion on your body after you do a tattoo? If they do, they already have a care routine. As long as you don't like really mess up their skin and make it bleed a whole bunch, like they already have enough to take care of it and make it healthy, right? It's something we say at the shop a lot is lotion doesn't heal wounds. If it did, doctors would use it. Like if you went into the doctor and you fell and scraped your knee and the doctor went, put some lotion on that, you would never go back to that doctor. You would leave, right? The things that we're doing are only to ensure pliability of the skin. Too much is bad. So yeah, pre-care if you can, absolutely. So you can have somebody start a pre-care routine 2 to 3 weeks before they come in. Their body will be adapted to that new product and it'll heal out better. Plus, I mean, their skin's going to be in a better condition when you go to work on it. And you can also test to see if the products are going to cause reactions, right? If you sell aftercare, give it to them ahead of time when you do the consult. Just give it to them for free. Who cares, right? Put this on your body, see if anything happens. If they get an allergy, response or something else happens, they get an eczema outbreak, or there's some other trigger, something else happens, don't use that in the aftercare. It's just common sense, right?
Well, it is when we start having these conversations. The problem is that we there's too many routines in our life and we don't ask why. And that's what I was speaking of before, is that's why we need to all be in the same room together, because everyone's asking our different whys. I didn't start thinking about this until my 25th year of tattooing,
Yeah. Just the biggest thing to know is like all the colors that we use right now are suspect. Everything is suspect. There is no guarantee that anything is going to heal out well. The more melanated that someone is, the better the tattoo is going to heal out, especially if you don't like scar the hell out of them. You know what I mean? The lighter that someone's skin is, the faster that the pigment's going to erase from their body because they don't have anything protecting that pigment, right? If you want to do really bright colors on somebody who's light, try to keep it in spots that's protected from the sun, inner forearms, things like this, right? We used to do sleeves where you'd start them from the top down. And why do we do that? Because this spot would see less sun than this. So as the tattoos were done, right, and they got finished up, this one would be faded just enough with this one that they'd start catching up with each other around year 5. Now we're doing them backwards, right? These end up fading. It takes 5 years to do a sleeve. The bottom part of it looks like it's 15 years old and the top part looks fresh. It doesn't look cohesive. So you got to think ahead constantly with like how this is going to impact the design outcome in the future, and like pick your colors wisely. If you know that somebody's living in a very tropical area or they're equatorial or whatever, using deeper, richer colors would probably make more sense because it's just going to hold up. If they don't want that, try to find a spot that maybe you can sway them into. And I find that most clients that I work with, when I give them the information, like this is what's going to happen if you use this color because of your skin tone, they go, oh, dang, maybe I shouldn't do that. And let them make the choice. If they do make the choice, no, I have to have bright orange on the back of my hand. It's your choice. At least you've been informed,
You make a really good argument to talk about, to jump off of what Dave was talking about, of really thinking about the moves you're making. Dave was talking about the flexibility and movement and just drawing the tattoo on. And you're talking about, how much sun do people have? And I know in my own experience, if I'm going to do a Japanese sleeve and there's a dragon, for instance, I'm not putting a lot of the detail down below if you mow lawns for a living. It's just pointless. I'm going to put the head up here. And a lot of this stuff down here is going to be something that it can fade and not ruin our relationship.
No, and you think about stress points too on the body, right? What parts of the body create paper faster? Which ones age faster, right? You get around the joints, armpit, the skin around here by like the pectoralis muscle and the deltoid, it softens up faster. Inside back of the arm, this becomes saggy. The elbow gets crepe paper. You don't put detail in those areas. You don't put a whack of detail in the ditch. It's just not going to look good when it heals out, right? You're trying to find spots that you can protect from the environment. We do it intuitively. We'll try to do something that's cool from different angles so that people standing in different response points around that person are going to be struck by that image. You want somebody to be impressed from behind, beside, in front, and when they choose to open up,
Right. Very true. Yeah. Just putting some deeper thought into this. I don't know what gets covered. You know, there's a certain amount that gets covered in our formative years, our years 1 through 5. First is just getting
Yeah.
comfortable with your machines. But then when you get to, you know, by the time you get to year 5, 6, 7, 8, you're starting to see your stuff heal. Now you should be asking questions. Did I do the best practice? I got one more. I just want to, what is the biggest takeaway from today that you hope that we remember as we come to a close on this section?
We know nothing about the tattoo pigment we use. Nothing. We knew more in the 90s. Yeah, we've lost a lot of history and a lot of knowledge over the past like 15 years. People who were willing to give it away weren't listened to and ignored by the industry, and they've taken it and moved off, right? Like it's sad. So the people who are out here right now, I just want people to ask questions, right? Ask why. Why is this the best pigment? Why is it pro grade? Why is it for professionals only? Why are you selling it on Amazon? Like why? Just constantly ask questions. If you can ask those questions and you get responses that suit you, cool, go with it, right? But be skeptical.
Yeah. And I want to say, number one, thank you. Every time you have a presentation, I think of more questions, which is the important part. And I just want to mirror what you just said. In the old days, when we would get ink in the 90s, and this is just kind of how it was. It would come with a photocopy of something someone typed out of what inks to mix with what inks and how to use inks, because there was such a science to making the ink that it wasn't just a matter of like, here, have fun. It was like, this yellow is only intended for this. You know, do not mix this with red. It would say, do not mix this yellow with red. Do not mix this white with this particular purple.
With
And there's
different
reasons.
carriers.
If they don't want to share the reasons, they didn't have to share the reasons, but at least they told us how to use some of these basically chemicals together. Right.
Yeah. Maybe like Phil was talking to me a number of years back, Phil Fairweather, about making white. And he came up with this novel way of creating the smallest particles without getting them too small so that they're resorbed into the body. And it involved the rock tumbler and glass beads in about 6 months.
Yeah, that's true.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. Because at one point in time, in the basement of the last couple shops I worked at, we had in a dark room rock tumblers going, and we would be making our own ink. At this point in time, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. It just really isn't. Lars said something about Florida orange, RRP National Florida Orange. I know that even we know that the rumors are true that Chris Trevino bought all the red. You know, he liked it so much. So,
Nashville's yellow. My God, they had that golden yellow.
Yeah,
that stuff was nuclear.
Yeah, and I think there's only a couple companies that are kind of coming close to that yellow, but it's not. We painted one of our shops with that color.
Nice.
Because that's how much of a tribute we had to that. That was a huge deal, being able to pack yellow and have it stay.
One last thing, Matt.
Yeah.
With any of the stuff that you guys are using, check to see how many additives are in it, right? If there's no labeling, if you have nothing that's on there, if it says proprietary blend, try to avoid it, because those companies are trying to avoid legislation that's upcoming with the MOCRA stuff, right? You want to find stuff that has clearly labeled ingredients. I personally use a company called Fantasia because I know them and I've used them forever, and they just have water alcohol pigment, right? It doesn't mean that it's safe, but it means that what's on the label is in the bottle. And if there's something that goes wrong, I know I can tie it back to the pigment rather than one of the additives or surfactants that they put into it.
Right. So you're creating less points of failure.
Yep.
Makes sense. So again, if you like this presentation, this is my sales pitch. And if you didn't meet me before, I'm Matt. I've been tattooing since 1995. One day I will retire from tattooing. Before I do that, I want to help as many of the newcomers as I can. This is my goal. This is why this exists. And this is why Jackpot exists. And a lot of like minds are coming into those rooms. Jackpot is based on meetings just like this one. And Ryan has his own section inside of Jackpot where he contributes a lot of great content. So if you want to see more of that, that's also inside the community. With that being said, Ryan, thank you so much. We're going to move into the history phase. If your butt is starting to get sore from sitting for so long, I encourage you just to stand up and stretch for a second. Take and relax your shoulders down. Take your tongue off the roof of your mouth. Take a big deep breath really quick and get yourself a little bit energized. If you don't have a glass of water, do that. But we are going to go back to, let's see, I'm going to pin Lars here. And we're going to move on to Lars. Lars is an average, not average. That's not the word I wanted to say. Me and Lars have known each other for a long time. I've known Lars before he started tattooing, and our lives constantly have crossed paths. When we first met, we weren't best friends. We just knew of each other, and eventually got to the point where we knew each other so well we can tell embarrassing stories about each other. And that's what I think a true friendship is the ability to have the power to completely humiliate somebody, but not use that power because you are such good friends. Lars can share things about me. I don't care, but I will say there was one point in time we're both shirtless on a bearskin rug in a fancy restaurant somewhere in Oklahoma. And I think we thought it was funny. I don't know what the other patrons thought, but it was awesome. That being said, Lars's affinity has been to go down the road of history of why. And his why is going to be why are acetate stencils the way they are, and why are acetate stencils a limiting technology, and why did they have such a big impact on tattooing. Lars owns a shop outside of Columbia, Missouri, called Century Tattoo, and he has basically become obsessed. I know in the early days when we started doing conventions, he would lug books and books and books of old Flash along to those early conventions before we had iPads. And one of the things he started collecting was acetate stencils. So from that, I'm going to pass it on to you, Lars, and kind of show us a little bit about acetates, why they're important, what they were, how they were used, and why they had the look that they did, and what an important role they have in our history of tattooing.
All right. I assume everyone can hear me. Can you guys see me on the screen? Okay. So what we have here is an acetate stencil. This is a piece of plastic made from acetate. It is usually, these were before we had the paper stencils. This is what was commonly used. It is usually carved by hand or with some sort of etching tool. This one specifically here is a Sailor Jerry original. I have a collection of many old Flash pieces. This is stamped by him. They were often double-sided so that you could do the tattoo the same. Do the tattoo and just flip it around. How these are applied was relatively interesting. I actually am running a very analog conversation here, so you're going to get some very analog bits. What I find most interesting about acetate tattooing in general is honestly its limitation of the technology that was allowed and the way it made you think about tattooing, specifically in reference to traditional. So what we have here is another Sailor Jerry acetate, and I've primed it with this piece of paper just using Vaseline. Imagine that's a skin, right? And here it is you would just basically rub. I personally still prefer to use powdered charcoal, which was the classic. And you would get a stencil like this, just like we can watch right now. You stick it on, press it down a little bit, and there's, you can tap it. There's different ways to do it. And you pull it off. Ooh, doing this one-handed, so it's a little tricky. There we go. And it is not uncommon for you to have to do an entire tattoo with a stencil like that. This one, getting to use two hands, came out a little nicer, but it's a lot lighter. So again, you have certain limitations, and I'm not going to rotate my screen to see how the same stencil could be applied with two different potentials. And you have to remember here, these things were made for both out of limited technology, and simultaneously you had to worry about efficiency. So we have a situation here where you've got a tattoo that you have to let's imagine real fast. It's the 15th. There are a dozen soldiers that just got paid. You're coming into port, and you've got to get as much of your money as you can, because you might have a dead couple weeks. You might only have 3 or 4 clients coming in because tattooing is a different world back then. You have to create a situation where you can fast and effectively apply a tattoo with as little effort as possible and still maintain a bold, long-lasting piece. Much of the designs here I have found and was told when in conversations with older tattooers that these are all traditional tattooing is meant to be based off of 5 lines. What I went ahead here and did is to give you an example. These are what I call the 5 prime lines. You can see the first one is a single line that wraps all the way around the mouth. The other is this line that comes down, wraps around here, again, wrapping to this, to this, to this. This is what I would call the 5. This is the 5 prime lines and the freehand. What might happen should you lose that stencil? And let's go back real fast. Let me show you how easy it is to lose that stencil. Gone. A bad wipe, you lose the whole thing. It's toast. So you had to be able to create ways and pathways to memorize these designs quickly and to get them as close as possible. So what I have here is where I took a single tracing with a marker and just went once over it. And we have this, so real quick, I photocopied that snake, made a straight photocopy of the acetate, put it onto a whiteboard and put it together. We can look closely onto this one right here, and you can see where Jerry was building in, and there's his signature right there and his stamp for this one. This is another original Sailor Jerry. You have the diamond bridge back to create a location point for how big this needs to be where you start. You have a double line here where you can basically create an open gap space, and then scales. Those scales aren't down here. You already know they're here. You're going to practice to the point where you don't need to worry about scales. And guys, this is why tattooers tell you so often to trace, and like old tattooing was so much about tracing, because what you're building is a craftsmanship. You're building the ability to memorize and build designs without having to worry about where does it go, right? We're creating a system of minimalization so that the maximum creativity can be allowed. And that is honestly how I feel like it goes. So I have my tracing off of the stencil right here. This, and I've went ahead with red and highlighted the 5 prime lines, and I just traced it off these 5 straight to this. So anything that isn't highlighted in red is done just by freehanding. It's a little different. I didn't feel the need to add that second line if I were tattooing it. I would just know intuitively at this point that could be a good highlight. I could do it down here. Sometimes it whacks up a little bit. These designs are changed. Maybe the eye is a little different. This is going to happen. This happens to us all the time. We're used to that. You're not going to like do any one rows the same or anything like that. I have 2 more examples to show you guys. And you have right here. This is that parrot I was showing you guys earlier, right? This is a detailed acetate. If I were typically to do this, I would go from left to right. I'm left-handed. I would go from left to right and slowly block it out, just like this stencil. If I were to do this one, I would probably start with this line over here, work my way down, loop up, create another connecting line here. But if I'm losing that stencil or that client's being a pain in the ass, I'm doing the 5 prime. Like those are always my priorities to get before I do anything else on this tattoo. We have down here, these are what I would consider to be the 5 prime lines here. We've all drawn a wing. We know what a wing looks like. You should be drawing a wing enough so that you can create a situation where you don't have to worry about this, right? You've got your base example of flow and where these need to meet. You've got kind of the general width of the tail, the general shape of the head, and the general shape of the foot. So this is my exact tracing off of this, right? As close as I could get it. You can see I kept most of it. The one I always take off is this. I think that was a mistake or something that like when it was being put on, it just never fits. Sometimes I add it in when I do it. Sometimes I don't. I've done this stencil 5 or 6 times. Same with the snake, at least 5 to 6 times. So we're looking in closely. We've got all these nice details. I had all the time in the world to really get this ready. We come over here. Some of the details are a little wonkier. Maybe the wings aren't as full. These are a little more stretched out. The issue being that I kind of just was working by hand with a certain quickness and I needed to get it done. Because again, I'm drawing these right now with the mentality that I have 7 other clients. Is that wing going to work? That wing and this wing aren't so different that I need to stress it. What you're looking for here is a bit of kind of like to pull off Dave. It's kind of a little bit of like a wabi sabi, you know, like, which is a Japanese idea that like, you're just going to figure it out. It's going to get figured out because you're going to figure it out. So I have another acetate for you guys to show you. This is one I've also done. It's a big old boat. I love this boat. This is a Burt Grimm original. This probably dates to the 1940s. And you can see, as I traced it, I made changes to it anyways, right? There's a little line missing here, some few things here and there. Even on the stencil, as I get in close, you're gonna find these like little bits of it that aren't quite as consistent as the others. But I'm not worried about that. I know where that line is. I know where the flow of this is. I know where it needs to go. Maybe I made a few liberties here versus there because I thought I could make a better banner just quickly. So we have again, and if you guys have never broken down a boat, they're actually a lot simpler than you think. There's a lot more tricks and a lot more going on. You have again your 5' lines, which aren't what you, to most people when I tell them this, it's not what you think of. It's not the mast. It's the outside of the sails. From that, I was able to build this boat, again, freehanding, the whole thing. I know what a banner looks like. You've done a banner. You've done lettering. You've done names. You've done ships. These are all things that we know. I'm going to flip this back around for us. This is our history. Just as Dave was able to talk about what old, like tattooing from the Edo period up to the Meiji period, and like how that changed, and like how these things inform us. Like traditional tattooing is our only true version of that in our form, right? As Westerners, this is the style and the mindset that put us on the path we are today. There's a certain amount of efficiency and consideration that should be done, but there's also a lot of craftsmanship. The same craftsmanship that can be found in any artist doing any form. I really critically feel that like practicing skills like this are the kinds of things that can make you a better artist, because what makes these, what will separate good tattooers from bad is not how perfect the stencil is. Like what makes a good tattooer or a great tattooer or separates us out into individual people is not necessarily the ease of the project or the preparation is a big one, right? Because you have to prepare to get to here. But our mistakes are what define our styles. And those mistakes can become your strength, like chances are everyone in this room that's ever tattooed has probably struggled with drawing something. And if you were serious about it and you put a lot of time into it, it can easily become your strength, because that's where you put all of your energy, was getting your lines right, getting your shading smooth. And now you have the edge because you're hyper focused on it. So when I think about these, it's like, I'm not honestly like, is it the most perfect tattoo? No. If I tattooed it and I have back to this, if I tattooed it and my wings are a little different here, I'm not going to trip it. Like it's an honest tattoo. And this is what I like about acetates is it gives you that experience to be honest with yourself, honest with your clients, and see where you sit on designing. Like what happens when you have a simple project and you just want to move it forward into like a little more, like you're allowed to take a few complexities. You don't have to do a diamondback rattler. You could do any shape you want. You got to freehand it, but you got to trust yourself. It's an opportunity to trust yourself. And I think that is something that is like very critical in this job, is building set ways to trust yourself. Does anyone have any questions at all? Ryan.
Do you think that today's modern tattooing, with the focus on trying to do perfect replications, has taken some of the soul out of it?
Absolutely, 100%. I think that the idea of tattooing being perfect is as ludicrous as tattooers taking them so seriously to think of themselves as high artists. You're not going to see my tattoos hanging in a museum. That is a lot of effort and a lot of butchery, you know. At the end of the day, someone's getting skinned to keep a tattoo in a museum. Everything we have is essentially memes left over. We spend our lives honing honing the dream of a perfect master of a craft that will quite simply disappear within 100 years. All we're left with are bits and pieces and side drawings or machines. Like, all the aspects that are, all we're left with are byproducts. None of our like core focus exists in 100 years. Like, and I think there's something beautiful in that, and I don't think that should be dismissed.
Yeah, I was kind of with you with that. I constantly asking people, like, you're trying to take a picture that's going to be a fixed point in time to show people what your prowess is, but 5 years, it's not going to look like that. Why go to such effort to try and do something that you know is going to deteriorate so much, rather than just trying to do something you know may last longer? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It seems wild to me. I love acetates. I used them when I first started. They're terrifying. The very first tattoo I did was with an acetate, and the first thing I did, because no one had told me, is I gave it a wipe, and I wiped the whole thing clear off.
Yep.
Yeah. And then it was panic. And the guy looked at me, and he looked down, and he looked at me, and he's like, "You got this?" And I went, "Yeah." And I had to pull it off. The tattoo turned out okay, right? It wasn't perfect, but it was okay. And it was a really good learning experience. So hearing you say that stuff, like those variations make something that's unique, it makes me feel kind of better about that experience. So thank you.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, that there it is, right? Like, we get tattooed as an expression of a human experience. Like, I love acetates because they are, like, in my mind and from my perspective, one of the penultimate ways we can have a unique experience with two people. And I found, for me, when I practiced them, what got me into them not only was buying them, because I would thumb through them for reference at first. And so I just started like asking like a few of the older guys I knew, like, how did you do it? Everyone hated them. But I think that's like, you know, it's like, I always think we look at the worst times of our lives and then we make jokes about them later, you know, like the shittiest shit you're in, that's the stuff you're talking about later. Like, that's what you're going to love. And for like younger tattooers, like, I'm still meeting people to this day that don't know what these are, and they've been tattooing 10 years. And I really feel strongly that not only is this a beautiful sub form of our Western tattooing, but it really captures the soul of what we do.
Lars, I really appreciate this explanation. And when we're talking about using acetate stencils versus using our modern ways of making these really uber crisp, unnatural stencils that even our hands would have a hard time following on flat paper, much less on skin. When we're working with acetate stencils and you have the dangers that are there, you're going to jump into more sensory and more muscles that you don't necessarily have to exude with a permanent stencil, so to speak. When you have a temporary style stencil like an acetate, you really do have to think a lot more about the craftsmanship. And I want to say that if you're from St. Louis area, if you ever been here before, we had a big fire just like Chicago, and everything had to start being built out of brick. And if you look at the sides of all of our brick buildings, they're all really skinny, and there's stars on the outside. And what those stars are essentially doing is they're holding like an all thread, so to speak, in place. And as that building ages, the bricklayers of the day designed them so they kind of fall in on themselves. And as that brick falls in on themselves, it gets stronger. And then those stars no longer have tension on them, and they fall to the ground, and you can find them in thrifts, different antique malls and stuff like that. To me, that's tattooing. When the discussion you had earlier, Ryan, about that, about like, why are you sweating something that's not going to be perfect forever? I think the real goal is that you're trying to round third, and you're going to send them home when you get to third base. That's when you're done with the tattoo for the day. And the next 5 years it takes to complete the last leg of the journey to get home, because just like that brick building falls in on itself, the carbon settles, the saturation points settle, things start to kind of age and look right. And even like the weirdest little wonky line that you're stressing over that day, in 5 years, the natural course of action we'll straighten that line out for you. So I think that the biggest difference between acetate and what we're doing today is we're back in the day we were tattooing for the client. There wasn't, there's few tattoo artists who actually had a photo booth to document. Burt Grimm was one, but we weren't tattooing for the day. We weren't doing a tattoo and in the back of our head going, oh, I need this to be perfect because I'm going to take a picture of it in about 5 minutes and show it to 20 million people. And I think that's what I love about acetate stencils is that whole era was more like the spirit or the essence of tattooing, not this fucking look at me kind of feeling. I hope I'm explaining that correctly, but I think there's a funness to just letting tattoos be what they're going to be, like you said, with the wings of that parrot, and not stressing that it doesn't look like this drawing over here, because you're creating a new life with every new tattoo.
I've been doing acetates for over 10 years now. I don't do them all the time, right? Like it's not my bread and butter, but I would say I do 2 or 3 a year, maybe more conventions, maybe whenever I do, like sometimes I'll do like a little special event where like I only charge so much for them. And I still like, I love going as far back as I can. Like I have a few rules for myself. Never use anything. I never use any like disposable like tubes when I do it. So no cartridges and no disposable tubes. And then I still shade with flats when I do them because I want that look. I want that thing to look like, I want it to look like your grandpa got it. And I am consistently blown away by the experience that I always have with my client in that situation. Like a lot of my friends get them, but like, it's always memorable because you kind of just have to like relax. It's like emotionally you have to surf, right? Like acetate tattooing is the surfing of this of the whole situation. You're in the moment, you can't tense up, you have to be chill, you have to be silly, you have to keep it fun, because otherwise you're going to get in your head about it. You might make a mistake, you have to be okay with a mistake. And I tell my clients, like, this is, in my mind, using I think we peaked honestly with acetates in many ways, and like other styles that embrace the imperfection of what we do, because it's not forever. And even if even if someone gets one, like, I mean, like, that's not like, if they get one, it's not forever. It's not probably the only tattoo they have. And it, like, you're talking about like spending all this time, Ryan, about like these, working on this perfect piece, and it's like, yeah, and sometimes they fall apart in 10 years because you didn't know your pigments or whatever reason it is, like I've seen my tattoos 20 years healed. Not all of them are great. None of them were at that time, actually.
Thanks, Lars. I want to give an opportunity for Preach and Ringo or Mikey if you guys want to jump in and say anything before we sign off for the evening and before we thank Lars. Has anybody got anything or any memories they have of working with acetates or any horror stories? No big deal. All right. Lars, I want to thank you for being on here. And Ryan, I want to thank you for being on here. I love these meetings because I do get so much out of them. They are packed full. We did go for 2 hours, which is hard for any of us who didn't like being in school to sit here that long. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who hated school but sat through this. That's a true, we're true students of this craft. I know that, there's 10 other things we could have been doing, especially after our long holiday 4th of July weekend. We haven't set up next month's yet, but on this recording, I'll just tell anyone who's watching this on YouTube that there is more of this stuff daily inside of Jackpot, and we'd love to meet you. We'd love to share our experience with you and have you share your experience with us. So that's a little part of that. Lars, is there anything that you want to tell us that you want us to remember as we walk away tonight?
I think the thing that practicing acetates, and because I started with just tracing off the pictures, it just reminded me to relax, have fun, and to like treat the job like a craft. It allowed me to give me an opportunity to find what was perfect about the imperfect tool and how to add my own voice to it, because all of our style is the byproduct of focus and accident.
Perfect. Preach, you want to give us one more question before we sign off?
Yeah, man, it's not a question. I just wanted to tell you guys, thank you for what you guys have done, for what you do, for Ryan. Really enjoyed working with you. I just overslept last 2 weeks, but you guys have to be here because you set it up. I don't have to be here, so I know that it's like it can be taxing, and so I just want to say it's appreciated, thoroughly appreciated, and I'm thoroughly enjoying everything on the Jackpot, and it's been amazing. So thank you.
Thanks, Preach.
That was it.
Yeah, I think we all love doing this. I mean, we're a weird bunch of people who are obsessed about our careers, you know, and I think this tonight showed us that you can find your reason why and why you want to get into this, you know, and there's always an angle. If you're burnt out on tattooing, then you just haven't asked the right questions yet. I think that's the truth of the matter, you know. So with that, we'll say the meeting's officially over. Thank